Welcome to Days Info Enterprise Series. What makes a successful product guy get transformed into a successful entrepreneur? Or a successful product guy could also build a successful company, could also drive a new startup, or is it a myth? To discuss more about this, today we have Mr. Sharad Sharma, Executive Council Member, Nasscom India. So we have here Mr. Sharad, a man in demand. Sir, I would like to start with the question that why most of the product people, specifically in IT industry these days, they really want to jump into the entrepreneur bandwagon, and everyone wants to start some company, they want to become a part of the startup ecosystem. Why is that so?
I think that's a natural evolution of our ecosystem. And first of all, the domestic market is opening up. So people can relate to problems, they can touch and feel the people who are feeling those problems.
Okay.
There's more venture capital, early angel capital available. Third, at least here in Bangalore, a culture has got established where it's cool to be an entrepreneur,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
and why? Because you are producing $1 billion company by valuation, a product company every year, and I think we'll continue to do that for the next few years. Now, why is that significant? If you go back, the last services company, IT services company that was venture funded was Mindtree, and Mindtree is not yet hit $500 million.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
So now here is a situation where the services industry is not producing $1 billion companies anymore, but product industry is. So naturally, that is a place where smart people want to be. So it makes sense.
So my first question actually was a subset of my real question, which is going to come now. Do you think, because as I said, everyone wants to become an entrepreneur. So do you feel that every product guy has that ability to become an entrepreneur? Because I strongly believe that there is a significant difference between a king and a kingmaker. So not necessarily a kingmaker need to become a king. So what is that thin line which differentiate both of these people?
Right. So this is a raging debate whether or not entrepreneurship can be learned. And I believe answer to that is yes. And the question is, creativity, risk-taking, is it like something that, is it like spoken language or written language? You take a child and a child will learn how to speak the language without anybody teaching that child how to. But a child surrounded by everything written on the walls is not going to learn how to read and write, right? So that is something which has to be instructed and they have to consciously learn. So I believe entrepreneurship and risk-taking is like learning how to speak. If you're in the right environment and you move in the right circles, then you'll pick up those skills, even if they're not being taught to you explicitly. And of course, if they're being taught to you, like a mother sometimes talks to the child, and that actually helps the child pick up the language faster.
Correct.
So I think both of those things I tend to believe, to answer your question, that risk-taking, going outside your comfort zone, mastery, self-mastery, focusing on excellence on your own without somebody pushing it, coming from within, which are key attributes. Being a contrarian.
So are you trying to say the passion is more than sufficient to become an entrepreneur?
So all these are important mindset elements that you need to pick.
Okay.
And I think if you are in the right environment, then you pick them, because they're available to everybody to pick.
They should take a chance.
And people generally pick them, and therefore they can become an entrepreneur if they want to.
As you said that that it's not written on walls that someone can become an entrepreneur.
Right.
But then why so much of buzz about crash courses or such type of courses like the IPL sort of workshops? Is it really necessary, vital for a product guy?
Yes. So I think so there are two ways to look at this. One is, if you look at it from a human potential perspective, I may be competing for Olympics in a certain, so I'm obviously very good. I'm probably in the top 50 or top 10 people.
Okay.
But even if I'm in the top 5, you can bet I have a coach.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
Because the role of a coach is to close the gap between your potential and where you are today.
True.
Right?
True.
And even if you are the world's best, there's often still some potential
correct.
to become better.
Yeah, isn't it
right?
still
So the role of IPL and the role of these programs is really to close the gap between what is your potential and where you are today, and to raise the potential even further. So I think there is always going to be a need for this kind of help, so that people can be the best that they can.
But again, considering that lots of such type of workshops are already in place, and people are just jumping up to do one or after another one. Courses like an IPL or any other courses which can truly add potential to your value, how a person, a product guy can really leverage upon it?
So they're soft things. I mean, first they learn the vocabulary, they learn the skills, they learn the buzz, they learn how to learn because they are pointed to resources that they may not have thought of. But finally, the most important thing is they are immersed in a set of people which they may not get a chance to do.
Correct.
Which actually helps them create a sounding board and learn on an ongoing basis.
True.
So that network becomes very important. So I don't think, frankly, this will ever go away. I mean, there's a precedence for this, right? We've had very smart techies, but they won't become architects. You ship them off to the US, and 3 years later, they're wonderful architects. Why? Because they're living amongst architects.
Correct.
And living amongst architects, you pick up. Even if you have the innate talent, you pick up how to become a good architect.
Correct.
But if you're not living amongst them, you don't know what to do next, right?
True.
So what this course does, or similar courses do, is immerse you amongst people who are also speaking the same vocabulary, and therefore you can be more successful at making the shift from not being product oriented to becoming product oriented.
But again, if every product gem will become an entrepreneur tomorrow, don't you feel like it will recreate an issue for all those existing IT companies, as well as for them also to survive with the real assets of team in their company to run it for the longer duration?
No, I think everybody has to be an entrepreneur in today's world. Even if you're working in a big company, you got to be an intrapreneur. There's no substitute for thinking like an entrepreneur. I think that is a given. That is going to become a default skill that you need, which means you have to push the envelope. You have to conceive value that nobody has thought of before. Now, these are skills that you will need no matter what. And the only difference is that a product manager is trying to do this in a very systematic fashion with respect to some repeatability, right? And I think, therefore, there are different animals than, let's say, a restaurant entrepreneur, right? I may be in Malleshwaram and I see there's no Italian restaurant there. So I go and say, let me set up an Italian restaurant.
Correct.
So he's a rent seeker. He's a niche filler. The product entrepreneur is fundamentally different.
Correct.
He's a little bit of that, but he's an arms merchant. He says, how can I equip my customers so that they will take market share away from their peers? And they're essentially arms merchants. They're disruptors. And you need to live amongst disruptors to pick up that passion. Turn a native skill of being able to see a niche.
So basically,
to be able to reorder the market that you are operating in.
So basically, a company should have all the capabilities to identify, distinguish between an asset and an employee.
Right. Absolutely.
Just wanted to divert the discussion, like, as you have already led one of the biggest online website as well as the company. These days, all the startups which are coming up, what do you suggest to them? Whether is the right time to go ahead, or probably the right choice to pick up any internet-based startup or any of the offline? Because in lately, so many startups, I have never bumped any of the startup which is doing anything offline. If you see, majority, 90% of the startups either getting dependent on the internet business model, and very few are currently adopting the offline model. Why is that so? Is it because of the penetration of internet, the explosive growth of internet, or something else, which we are not able to identify at this point of time?
No, first of all, I don't think that is true. I'm an investor in a company called Conshore, which makes incontinence devices, which is as physical as you can get because it's a medical device.
Correct.
Right? But on the other hand, one reason there are all kinds of product startups. Not all of them are online product startups. There are lots of offline product startups. EasyTab, is an example. I mean, so there are many such examples. But one reason why online product startups is that today, if even 5 years ago, it wasn't possible that you could have a YouTube, a global successful YouTube-like success story out of Koramangala.
Correct.
Because, you needed to have data centers, who's going to fund those data centers, those data centers needed to be close to where your customers are, so you couldn't do it out of Koramangala, you needed to do it out of the US. All that has gone away because of the cloud.
Correct.
Right? Correct. Today, literally, it is possible to have a YouTube-like success story out of a house in Koramangala, because they're not going to build a data center, they're going to rent a data center.
Correct.
And so on and so forth. So there is a sea change that has taken place, and this is not new. This has happened before with hardware. In hardware, it happened with merchant foundries. If you go back in time, you wanted a new chip. You also needed a new factory.
Correct.
A factory cost $1 billion.
Yes.
So therefore, only few companies in the world could be chip designers. Then came this whole concept of merchant foundries, which said, you focus on designing the chip, I will focus on building the chip.
Yes.
Right? So now anybody could design a chip, and now today you have a chip for a doorknob, you have a chip for this, you have a chip for that, and people all over the world are able to design chips, right? And the chips have multiplied 1,000-fold compared to the era where only 10 or 15 people could afford to design chips.
Correct.
So that's what's happening to software now. Earlier, a big system could have only been designed by a big company. Now anybody, a group of 5 people sitting here can design a complex software, because they don't have to worry about owning the factory on which it is going to, or the data center it is going to.
So basically the initial investment is going low, and
capital intensity therefore is coming down, and therefore they can build on this.
But as you said that these days lots of local companies are also emerging up. So think about a situation like local base in every city, a company has got hold of that in that city. Take example of IBBit has got getting more revenue for tier B and tier C city rather than tier 1 cities.
Right.
Don't you think that this is so much for something very few, so much for something less? We are trying to do so.
No, but this is a typical process. Take DuPont. DuPont was a roll-up in the early 20th century of local companies that existed. Then one of them was smart enough, he went and bought out everybody.
Correct.
You go 30-40 years ago, Saatchi and Saatchi, they bought up all the ad agencies and created a big one.
Yes.
So that's a natural phase of an industry. First you have to create lots of ad agencies everywhere.
Yeah.
Then 30 years, 20 years later, somebody will come and roll it up, right? So this is not a bad thing, because this is a happy development. Let everybody come up in have their own niches that they dominate, and then 20 years later, somebody will come and roll all of them up into it's called horizontal integration.
Correct.
And that's a stage of evolution of an industry. And therefore it will happen here as well. We may see it in restaurants, right, and other places first, and that is happening. Even in some of skincare, it is happening, and other places it is happening as well.
But so many startups and so many companies are coming up, and if you see the last year,
I don't think there are enough. I don't agree with you that there are too many. Right?
No, I'm not saying too many, but yes, in the context of
they're more than what they were earlier.
Comparatively, there are so many companies, but if you see the last year, the year was like merger and acquisition. Lots of companies got acquired. Lots of companies took further round B, round C, series of funding.
Right.
So lots of mergers, lots of acquisitions, and lots of competition. And obviously, because of all those competition, we are throwing towards margin. So there's enough money in that. Are we creating enough money in that?
Yeah. So if you go back just 150 years, the Western way of thinking was that growth was a straight line process, because that is what they had experienced since Christianity, right? Then there's a guy who came, his name is Schumpeter. He said, "No, life is not like that. It is creative destruction." Right? Things grow, they destroy, then they grow again.
Yeah.
Now, if you really trace where Schumpeter got that idea, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but it came from our Hindu philosophy.
Correct.
In fact, that is where it comes from.
Correct.
That there is creative destruction. Now, we are only late adopting that idea, because we built a economic policy patterned on socialism, which was also going in a straight line. But the reality is that we are the foundational culture which brought this notion of creative destruction to the rest of the world. The Western world adopted it in economics. We are just adopting it now.
True.
So I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of, this notion of creative destruction. Companies get bought, some of them fail, some of them get merged, and the same people go back and start new ones, and and the process continues.
And
so
I think this trend in long time back, because I'm able to recall a story. There was a king called Nawab Wajid Ali Shah, and he used to build in a daytime whole something, and again night he used to destroy it. So I think this practice is very long.
It's in our culture. So we should embrace this, not be scared of it, because that is our belief as a country.
I would like to conclude this discussion with the last question. Next 3 years down the line, where do you see the growth of India in terms of startup and in terms of internet?
It's a very good question, and so I will give you an answer. I will start with a very, very bold statement. And then I'll give you my argument as to why I believe that. I think India will transform itself on the back of software products. And I'll explain why. See, if you have to only fix 5 hospital chains, you can go to a Wipro or a Infosys or a Accenture and say, build the software for me. But if you got to fix literally 5 lakh primary healthcare centers, then you need a software like Tally,
which can
go and do it. I mean, it's not going to be, and that means it's got to be repeatable and it's got to be cheap and it's got to be deployable. Now, if India has to have a future, then our small business sector has to become competitive. If it does not become competitive, we'll become a UK, where the small business sector got hollowed out.
Correct.
And as a country, its future is impaired. Germany has a future because even today, the power source of its exports and growth is the small business sector. Correct. So the question that we have to ask ourselves in India, how will we turn our small business sector and turn it into competitiveness and make that a power of growth in the future? That will happen on the back of a 20 rupee a day, a 20 rupee a month per employee software, rather than 10,000 rupee or a 50,000 rupee software, right?
Good.
Now that for the first time is possible to do. In Koramangala, you have a company called Greatip, which offers you payroll for 10 rupees per employee per month. Now it's a no-brainer implementing it. For even a small business owner, he says, I've got 7 employees, 70 rupees.
Get a volume with it.
I get benefit. My life is simpler. I can manage leaves much better. It's a simple solution, but very, very effective at that price point.
Correct. And impressive ROI.
And that company is profitable. So for the first time, we are beginning to see what happened with mobile phones happen to software. Mobile phones, if only iPhones could have been sold, a rickshaw puller wouldn't have had the mobile phone. And mobile phone has benefited everybody, especially the poor, more than it has benefited the rich. And for the first time, you are now getting software which is going to be cheap and therefore will fill every nook and cranny. And as it fills that cranny, every piece of software actually carries a best practice into that business. When you have a payroll software that comes in, you inherit with it the best practices of doing payroll. It is natural that happens, even though you're spending only 10 rupees per employee a month. So it will raise the productivity and the competitiveness of our small business sector. So I believe that India's future lies in fireflies lighting up the sky.
True.
And fireflies, in that firefly, the source of energy, that gives them is this penetration of software. When combined with mobile revolution, together they will transform India, because India is fundamentally a hard-working entrepreneurial country which has been held back by our governance, and this can unleash things. And so if you want to transform India at large, then the revolution that the hints of revolution that we are seeing, they are going to be very important for a country.
So the takeaway I'm saying is, like, do not be scared from the number. Look for the volumes as well as the quality, right? Absolutely. And obviously, it's, as he said, rightly said, it's written on the skies, which really we need to see, and we need to adopt it as fast as possible. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you.